Let's see how you manage to get married now. Just one sentence. Short. Scrawled in messy handwriting, pinned right onto the burned, tattered fabric of my wedding dress. No signature, none needed. I knew exactly who sent it. My parents. The very people who quietly flew to Hawaii on the morning of my wedding day. I am Madeline Grace, 28 years old, and this is how my own parents reacted to my wedding by abandoning me. No congratulations, no hug, just a box. Inside, it was a burned wedding dress and a note that cut straight through my chest like a blade. If you've ever been turned away by your own family, subscribe to Revenge Mark. We're not staying silent anymore. I was born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, a small town, few people, pretty houses, and suffocating expectations. My parents, Thomas and Caroline Grace, were not bad people in the criminal sense. They were worse. They controlled through affection, sweet on the outside, ice cold underneath. Things like, we sacrificed everything for you, don't embarrass the family. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? But when you hear it over and over for 20 years, it slowly kills the person you are inside. I used to bend. I used to stay quiet. Until I met Caleb Monroe, a jewelry designer, gentle, sincere, and utterly unconcerned with what label I wore. We fell in love through rainy afternoons, jazz records, and sketching together in the backyard. He wasn't rich, but I felt at peace with him, and that drove my parents mad. Does he do that as a side gig? Can an artist like that even make a living? Our daughter should be marrying a doctor, an engineer, or at least a company director. I tried to explain. I tried to invite them to the wedding planning. A small wedding, cozy, in a garden home outside Bend. Only about 100 guests. Lavender flowers, white wooden tables, acoustic music. But they looked at me as if I'd just suggested getting married in a landfill. Still, I thought they'd come. They were my parents, after all. They couldn't possibly. 6:37 in the morning, on my wedding day. My phone rang. It was my younger sister, Savannah, her voice breaking. They flew out. Overnight. To Hawaii. Didn't say a word to anyone. I froze. My hands shook as I opened the door to my apartment. The box. On the lid. Written in thick black marker to Madeline. Inside was the wedding dress I had picked out just last week with Caleb's mother, now reduced to scorched fabric, shattered beads. The veil turned to soot. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat down on the floor, cold, rigid, just like my heart in that moment. Let's see how you manage to get married now. That sentence repeated in my head, like nails being driven into bone, one after another. This wasn't just disapproval. This was deliberate sabotage. Deliberate humiliation on the most important day of my life. Deliberately burning to ashes every dream I dared to build for myself. And in the acrid smell of burned fabric, I felt strangely calm. A voice rose inside me. They've already walked out of your life. So what are you waiting for? I stood up. Not for them. For me. For Caleb. And for the day. I would make them regret it. But am I truly strong enough, or is the collapse only just beginning? I sat on the bathroom floor of the hotel, my knees pulled tight against my chest. No more tears. No more trembling. Only a cold, hollow stillness, as if every last bit of emotion had been drained away, and what was left of me was just a breathing corpse. The door was still slightly ajar, and from outside drifted the distant laughter of the bridesmaids. They didn't know yet. They thought today was a happy day, that I was getting ready, smiling radiantly, that my father would walk beside me through the rows of lavender flowers in the afternoon sun. But no one came. No one was there for me in the moment I needed them most. I covered my face, not to cry, but to keep myself from shattering. I heard the door open. Jess, my best friend from college, walked in. Her eyes looked at me as if she were seeing the ruins of a person. "Maddie, your sister just called. The box. Is it real?" I gave a small nod. Jess took a deep breath, then wrapped her arms around me. The hug was tight, wordless, only the sound of our hearts, and the broken, uneven breaths of two women. One who had just lost her parents on her wedding day. One who didn't know how to mend a fracture like that. Moments later, the bridesmaids poured in. They hadn't seen the dress yet, hadn't seen the note, but they saw me and I didn't look like any bride they had ever known. So, what now? One of them whispered. No one dared to speak louder, as if they were afraid they might break me just a little more. I didn't answer, because honestly, I didn't know. I had never imagined a day when my parents wouldn't come to my wedding. Never thought they would do something like this. I remembered how my father used to stand at my high school graduation, arms crossed, eyes unblinking, as if evaluating every step I took. My mother clapped, but whispered to me after the ceremony, "We tried so hard, and you still only managed third place." That memory, I used to think it was small, but now, it all rushed back like a flood, the times they belittled me, compared me, twisted every effort I made, and today was the breaking point. Because I didn't choose the path they wanted. Because I didn't live the life they had laid out for me. Because I chose Caleb, a man they could not control. They couldn't bear it, so they left. Left behind a burned wedding dress. Left behind shame and a girl who was no longer anyone's daughter. The door opened again. Catherine, Caleb's mother, walked in. There was a flicker of anger on her face, but her eyes were gentle. She didn't say much. She just sat down beside me, resting her hand on my knee like the soft touch of a real mother. "They don't deserve you." Her voice didn't shake, but I did, because all my life, I had lived to please others, and today, on what was supposed to be my day, my own parents taught me their final lesson that their love always came with conditions. "You can change the wedding dress," Catherine said, "but don't let them take away the whole day from you." I turned to look at her. My eyes seemed to be asking, "How? How do you stand up when the people you trusted most are the ones who crushed your dream? How do you smile in front of everyone when inside you still smell the smoke from the ashes?" Jess stepped closer, phone in hand. "I called a bridal shop downtown. They're bringing some dresses over. All you have to do is say the word." I looked at them, one by one. They all looked at me as if I still had a choice. And I realized I actually did. I nodded, slightly, but clearly. Yet when I stood up, a lump rose in my throat, not from sadness, but from a question that suddenly echoed in my mind. If I get married today, without my parents, am I still someone's child? The dress arrived at exactly 11:13 a.m. An ivory Vera Wang, cinched at the waist, with lace-trimmed sleeves soft as water, light, pure, expensive. I stood in front of the mirror. New dress, fresh hair, my face masked by a layer of professional makeup. To anyone looking in, they would say, She's okay now, but I knew no silk could ever hide a heart still reeking of smoke and ash. The door closed. My bridesmaids had stepped out, leaving me alone for a few minutes before the car arrived. I placed my hand on the waistline of the gown. Silent. I never thought I'd be wearing a different wedding dress on the very morning of my wedding. And I never thought that what was making me stand so still at that moment wasn't sadness anymore, but something else. Sharper. Stronger. Like someone had just hit the rewind button on an old VCR. I was replaying everything, every word, every look from my mother, every quiet, disapproving glance from my father over the past 28 years. You're always dreaming? Stop deluding yourself. Don't marry someone who can't help you climb higher. Words I used to grit my teeth through, telling myself. All parents say that. But now, I saw it clearly. It was a strategy to suffocate. Catherine knocked on the door. She stepped inside gently, without fuss. The car's almost here. Are you ready? I turned toward her, nodded, then hesitated. Catherine, if it were your daughter, and her own parents did this to her, what would you do? She looked at me. Those eyes were still kind, but this time, there was something different. I wouldn't forget. Forgive. Maybe, but forget never. A silence fell between the two women, one who had just lost her parents, one who knew what it was to be betrayed by her own family. You have the right to be angry, she added softly. No one will blame you for that. It was the first time in my life someone had given me permission to be angry, not be the bigger person, not they're still your parents. Simply, you have the right to be angry. And in that moment, I started to feel like I didn't want to stay silent anymore. The ceremony was held outdoors. Caleb was waiting for me under a white floral arch, his eyes anxious but gentle. James, Caleb's father, was the one who walked me down the aisle. His hand rested on my arm, warm, steady, unshaking. His mom says you look beautiful, he whispered. And your own parents. They don't deserve you. I heard every word. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. The wedding flowed with a warmth that felt almost impossible. No one asked where my parents were. No one looked at me with pity. There were only hugs, well wishes, and eyes that truly saw me, not as a daughter who had betrayed her family, but as a woman who had survived. That night, I sat alone in the hotel room. Caleb was downstairs, thanking guests. I picked up my phone. A message from my younger sister mom posted a story of the ocean. Caption says, "Hawaii air feels so much better without the burden." I stared at the screen, speechless. Burden. Was that me, the daughter who gave up her dream of studying fine arts to get a degree in marketing? The one who worked 3 jobs at once just so I wouldn't have to burden the family's finances? I used to think I wasn't good enough. But now, I realized no matter how good I was, they were never going to love me the way I needed. I turned off my phone, pulled a small notebook from my purse. For the first time since the wedding, I began to write. Not a diary, not an apology letter, but a list of the things they had done to hurt me. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I only heard one sentence, loud and clear in my head. Is there a way for them to truly understand what they've done, without me having to scream it anymore 2 weeks after the wedding? I cut my hair. No more long strands. No more wavy curls. The way Mom used to like, just a neat, straight bob, tucked behind my ears, revealing my entire face. The hairdresser at the small shop on Main Street looked at me through the mirror and asked, "You've just been through something, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I just stared at my own reflection in the mirror. My eyes were no longer swollen. My lips no longer trembled. But inside my chest, there was still something unsettled. I was married. Caleb and I moved into a new apartment on the outskirts of Portland, a small, bright space with a west-facing balcony and the smell of coffee every morning, every evening. He came home early, did the dishes, humming while wiping down the kitchen counter. Catherine would call to remind me to keep my neck warm, and James sent photos of their new dog as if I were truly their daughter. I was wrapped in the warmth of a loving family, and yet, for some reason, I still felt bristly inside, as if I had survived a fire, but the ashes hadn't yet fallen off my skin. One night, I opened the small notebook I'd written in after the wedding. The first page was a list, every word, every look, every incident I had forgotten or tried to forget. I once thought they were small things, but no, they were sharp pieces of metal building up over the years, and the wedding day was the final cut. I need to take something back. I whispered it, almost like a confession to myself. Caleb heard me. He was folding laundry, paused, and turned to me. Take back what I hesitated. I didn't know what to call that feeling. Was it dignity? Was it trust in myself? Or simply the right to be angry without having to apologize for it? I don't know. I said, I just don't want them thinking. I'll forget. I began writing everything down more seriously, no longer just a random list. I opened my laptop. I created a folder named Unnamed Ending. I recorded every detail what Mom had said to my friends when I chose my college major, what Dad had done behind my back when I applied for my first job, the texts, the emails, and the times they had made sly remarks about Caleb. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I wanted to have it, not to expose, but to face the truth. The more I wrote, the more I remembered. The way Mom smirked when I handed her my straight A report card. The way Dad once said at a family dinner, "You did well, but it's just barely up to standard. So don't get cocky." I used to think they were teaching me humility. But now, I knew clearly they dimmed every spark in me, so their light would shine brighter. One Wednesday afternoon, I sat at a small cafe near home and opened my laptop. The words appeared on the screen like blades turned back at them. I named the file The Untold Story, not to publish, not to be famous, just to start rewriting my life from my own perspective. Catherine walked into the cafe, carrying 2 cups of peach tea. "Are you writing something?" she asked, setting one cup down. I smiled. Something old, but for the first time, written the right way. She didn't ask further. She just sat beside me, both of us looking out the window together. I haven't told anyone about my plan, because truthfully, it's not quite a plan. It's just a direction, a journey against the current. That night, Caleb went to bed early. I stayed at the small desk tucked against the window. The streetlight spilled through the thin curtains, pooling over the stack of files in front of me. No one knew that for the past 3 weeks. I had been quietly gathering every document related to the joint bank account I once opened with my mother back when we still lived under the same roof. And this morning, when I called the bank to request removing her access, the bank clerk hesitated. "Are you sure the card is still actively being used?" I smiled faintly. "I'm sure." with a single click. I ended my mother's spending privileges on that account. The same card she had secretly been using all this time for little things, spa visits, designer boutiques, a few weekend trips with friends, all still under my name. Back then, I turned a blind eye. I thought of it as paying back for raising me, but today, I owed them nothing anymore. 2 days later, Savannah texted me, "Mom's furious. She got declined at the airport." I stared at the message but didn't reply. I simply set my phone down and opened my laptop. Back into the folder, nameless ending. Added a new note. April 24th. First strike. I didn't tell Caleb. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted this first move to be mine alone. No protector, no guide, just me, and a silent vow that I would never let myself be trampled again. A few days later, Mom called. I didn't pick up. Then came the messages. "What are you doing? Is this how a daughter behaves?" I didn't reply. For the first time, I let the scolding pass, without sinking into my bones. Catherine happened to see me scrolling past the messages over lunch. "You okay, sweetheart?" I nodded. "Honestly, I just did the first thing to break free from a chain I've worn for 28 years. She didn't ask more. She just smiled. A small smile, but one that told me she understood. That evening, I stepped out onto the balcony, took my tea and my notebook with me. I wasn't making a list anymore. I started sketching a system, not to retaliate out of bitterness, but to build boundaries, clear, firm, unbreakable. I knew they wouldn't sit still. I knew that when their benefits were touched, people's true faces would show, and I wanted to see them for who they really were, not who I once believed them to be. A week later, Mom called again. Her voice was calm, strangely, pretending nothing had happened. "I'm thinking of hosting a gathering at the house. Invite Dad's side, Mom's side, and a few old friends. You two should come." I froze as if nothing had ever happened. No mention of the wedding, no mention of the dress. Not a single apology, just a cold reset, pretending I was still the daughter in their script. I sat up straight, gripped the phone. "I'll think about it and let you know." I hung up, and I knew this wasn't the ending. It was only them starting to sense the shadow of something coming. If you've ever endured in silence, ever been painted as the villain just because you dared to say enough, then maybe it's time you told your story. Subscribe to Revenge Mark, because pain should never be buried forever. The message from Aunt Margaret came on Saturday morning at 8:14. "Your mother just called me. She said that after your wedding, you turned your back on the family, that Caleb is pulling you away from your own flesh and blood. Is that true? Maddie." I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen table, my hands cold even though the heat was on inside the house. Just a week ago, she texted me congratulations on my belated wedding, and now the tactic had changed. They had begun telling their own version of the story. No direct threats, no tearful phone calls, just quietly leaking little stories, each one small like drops of poison, to neighbors, to relatives, to old friends. Some people got a phone call about the ungrateful daughter. Others were shown a spliced audio clip from a message I sent my mother back in February. I knew, because Savannah quietly told me, "Maddie, I'm sorry. I can't stay at the house much longer. They're making a big deal out of everything. I heard Mom recording some of your old conversations." I stayed silent. It felt like someone had just pulled all the air out of my lungs. That afternoon, I went to my usual bookstore near the park. Sitting in the corner, I opened my phone and saw a post. My mother, her personal account, a photo of me from high school, wearing the prom dress she had picked out. The caption read, "We used to be so proud. Too bad. Not everyone grows up knowing how to be a good daughter." More than 40 shares within a few hours. Some of the comments were from her old friends, but a few names I recognized were family. I didn't feel angry anymore, just the blood pulsing hard at my temples. They couldn't talk to me directly, but they were willing to twist the story, drag me out in front of everyone, like some public joke I was expected to endure. "They don't hit head on," I whispered. "They attack through other people's eyes." That evening, Caleb sat across from me. He already knew. Savannah had messaged him, too. "If you want, we can fight back." He said, "I know someone in the media who can help you rewrite your side of the story." I shook my head. "Not yet. I don't want to fight back with words. I want to—" I stopped. What did I want? I wanted them to be afraid. I wanted them to stop. Not because I cried, but because they knew they were wrong. I want everything to be clear. I went on, not through tears, but through the truth. Caleb nodded. He didn't push, but I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. The next day, Catherine invited me to lunch. She handed me a stack of papers. "When you first got married, I looked into a few legal steps, just in case the other side tried to interfere." I stared at her, not understanding. "I mean, if they tried to get to you financially, or make up something that could hurt Caleb, you need to protect both of you." Her voice wasn't panicked, just calm. But underneath that calm was a deep understanding of exactly what I was facing. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I've never had anyone think that far ahead for me." I brought the file home, set it on the table, marked the sections I needed to review. Inside was a small handwritten note from Catherine: "Don't let yourself react. Let yourself act." That night, I slept poorly. Dreams kept circling the image of my mother smiling, standing in a crowd, holding up the photo of the burned wedding dress. I woke in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, my hands ice cold. I knew for certain they would not stop. And the question now was no longer, will they attack again? But next time, where will they aim? The message came in at 3:09 p.m., while I was standing in the grocery store picking out tomatoes. Sender. My cousin Emily used to sit next to me at every family gathering, but rarely spoke. "Maddie, you're not wrong. Your parents have told their side, but I know something's off." One message, 13 words, and my heart pounded like someone had cracked open a door I had kept tightly shut. It was the first turning point, not a public rebuttal, not a dramatic confrontation in front of everyone, just one person, only one willing to tell me that I wasn't crazy and that I wasn't alone. That night, I called her back. The call lasted 43 minutes. She told me that after seeing my mother's post online, she went back and read through the old messages between me and my mom. Then she looked at my wedding photos, the one where James walked me down the aisle, and the way my eyes looked at Caleb. I don't believe someone who looks like that could be a heartless daughter. I laughed, and the tears followed right after. "Thank you," I said. I Thought no one noticed. They noticed, but a lot of them chose to stay quiet. She replied, "I'm just tired of it." The next morning, I opened the folder I called the unnamed ending. I added a new file counter evidence. It was the text from Emily, the handwritten letter from my mother's old friend, who had sent me a screenshot of my mom saying, "Caleb isn't good enough." I gathered them together, not to expose them yet, but to be ready, because I knew this win was only temporary. Still, it was enough to make me stand a little taller. One Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from a media partner of my old company, the one I worked at before I got married. "We're hosting an online talk show about family and hidden control, and we'd like to invite you as an anonymous guest." At first, I was going to decline, but Catherine looked at me after I told her about it and said, "You're going to speak as a survivor, not as a victim." The talk show was private. I used a fake name. But when I told the part about being abandoned on my wedding day, my burned wedding dress, and the isolation from my own family, both the host and the audience went silent. Then the comments started to appear. I thought I was the only one this happened to. It's like they manipulate you into feeling guilty for not putting up with it anymore. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. I left the recording with a strange feeling. Not relief, not triumph, but validation. For years, I had wondered if I was overreacting, if I were being selfish. But today, for the first time, I realized the truth wasn't just in the hands of the people who had hurt me anymore. Caleb was waiting for me in the lobby. "You okay?" I nodded. "I'm okay. But they're going to know about this. Soon." He took my hand, "And you won't be alone." That night, I got a message from Savannah. "Mom suspects someone in the family has been talking to you." She said, "If anyone betrays her, they'll never be forgiven." I set my phone down, stood up, looked at myself in the mirror. Same dress, same hairstyle, same face. But this time, the woman in the mirror wasn't afraid of not being forgiven anymore. 3 days after the talk show, I got an email from an unfamiliar account. Subject: truly disappointing. Inside was an audio clip less than 2 minutes long. The voice in it was my mother's. She always thinks she's special, but she has no idea. Caleb's the one who should really watch out. We have ways of making sure a marriage doesn't last long. I couldn't believe my ears. Not because she said it, but because she said it to someone I had once trusted to be neutral Aunt Annette, my mother's close friend, and also Caleb's godmother. My hands shook as I reached for my phone to call Caleb. He was at the office, about to meet with a client. I didn't know if I should shatter his calm like this. But then, I sent him the recording. No notes. No explanation. Just 2 minutes of truth. 9 minutes later, he called back. "They want to destroy our marriage." I stayed silent. "How? By things no one can see." I said, "Rumors. Subtle. But they sink deep." That evening, Caleb came home early. His eyes were red. He didn't cry, but I knew. It cut deeper than any insult could. She called my mother. "You've been forcing me to abandon my family, that you secretly used our joint card to pull money." I gave a dry laugh. This is her move. When she can't attack me head on, she goes for my reputation and my love. The next morning, Catherine asked me to come over. I walked in and saw Caleb sitting there beside his mother. His face was like stone. But Catherine was coldly calm. "They think they're clever," she said, "but they forget truth has a way of outlasting rumors." Then she opened her laptop. On the screen was the full, unedited recording restored by a friend of hers who worked in cybersecurity. It included the part they had cut before sending it to me. That part. My mother is laughing. She thinks marrying Caleb means she's won. Let her destroy herself. I leaned back in the chair. I didn't feel hurt anymore. Just drained. Catherine slid another folder toward me. If you want, this is enough evidence to sue for defamation even within the family. I don't encourage lawsuits, but I will not stand by and let them touch what's mine. I broke down. For the first time in months, I cried because I felt protected, not because I had to hold myself up alone. And then, Savannah called. Her voice was shaky, almost a whisper. Hey, I'm sorry. They know I've been talking to you. Mom found the old messages, and I haven't been allowed out of the house for 3 days. I froze. What do you mean Dad took my car keys? Mom said if I keep getting involved with that side, then I'm no longer a daughter in this family. No longer a daughter in this family. Once again, that sentence came back. Not at me this time, but at the only sister who had quietly stood by me. I let the phone fall from my hand. My whole body went cold. I thought I was ready, but I never imagined they would use my sister as a hostage. I looked at Caleb. I can't let them lock her up like that. What will you do? He asked, eyes tense. I met his gaze. This time, I won't just play defense. But if I strike back, will I lose Savannah? I sat alone in the kitchen. No lights on. Only the faint glow spilling in from the balcony through the gap in the curtains. The cup of tea had gone cold. My hands rested still on the cold wooden table. Savannah couldn't send me any more messages. Mom had taken her SIM card out, according to what she told me. And me, I had read that last message 4 times over. If you strike back now, I might get pushed even farther away. I can't remember the last time I felt this powerless. Maybe it was when I walked out of the bridal shop, holding that charred, ruined wedding dress in my hands. Or maybe it was when I tried to explain to Mom that I loved Caleb and got back the words, "Do you know that love alone isn't enough?" But this time was different. This time, the one being targeted wasn't me. It was my little sister, the one who still secretly left me a birthday note every year, even though she wasn't allowed to. The one who slipped candy into my pocket in 4th grade when Mom punished me for lowering my worth by snacking. The only person left who still belonged to the place I once called family. And now, she was trapped inside that very house, the one I escaped after nearly 3 decades, while she was still stuck there, because of me. I held my head in my hands, fingers trembling. What the hell am I doing? Maddie, I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. I thought I was strong. I thought, if I stayed rational enough, strategic enough, I could reclaim my dignity without anyone getting hurt. I was wrong. The further I pushed forward, the more I was dragging Savannah into a fight she never chose. Caleb stepped out of the bedroom. He didn't turn on the light, just sat down beside me. He didn't ask, didn't push me to talk. I just placed his hand on my back and gave it a light pat. 1 beat, then another. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and for the first time since our wedding day, I said something I had never dared to say. I'm not sure I'm good enough to do this. Not sure I'm still the woman you fell in love with. Caleb didn't react right away. He let me finish. Then he tilted his head, leaning in close to my ear. I love you, even when you're panicking, hurting, or wrong. But if you lose yourself because of this fight, that's what I'm most afraid of. I closed my eyes. Each word fell into a deep lake in my mind where the surface was still full of hidden undercurrents. I knew I couldn't give up. I also knew I didn't want to win if it meant Savannah lost her freedom. Caleb lost his faith, and I lost myself. I opened my eyes, staring at the cold cup of tea. Slowly, I stood up. I need time, not to step back, but to find the reason I started. I don't know if I'll hear from Savannah tomorrow. I don't know what other tricks my mother will try next. But tonight, in this unlit kitchen, I know one thing: if I collapse here, then everything I've stood for up until now will mean nothing. The next morning, I made myself some ginger tea and stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was slightly foggy. No rain, no sunshine. It felt exactly like the state of my heart at that moment. White-gray, hazy, but no longer as dark as the night before. I didn't expect anything to change today, but when I opened the mailbox, there was a small envelope with no return address. I opened it. A sheet of paper folded in half. Slanted handwriting. Familiar. It was Savannah. Sis. I'm okay. I'm fine. Mom can control me for a while, but she can't control my thoughts or my faith. I've never seen you as weak. But if you collapsed yesterday, I still believe you'll get back up. Because you're the reason I know I can break free too. I gripped the balcony railing tightly. A short letter, but enough to pull me back from falling apart. I went back inside and took out the notebook I once thought I'd put away forever. I opened to the very first page, the line I had written 3 months ago. I don't know where I'll end up, but I refuse to be silenced ever again. I sat down. I began to write again. Not a list of grudges, but things I want to hold on to. I wrote Caleb, kindness, my own voice, my sister, the way I walked out of the fire without turning to ash. That night, I told Caleb about the letter. He smiled, softly, but I could see it clearly in that smile, which was a sigh of relief. You can't protect everyone, Maddie, he said, but you can live in a way that makes others brave enough to protect themselves. I nodded. No argument. Because he was right. I can't be a warrior for the whole world, but I can be a light. Small, but burning at the right moment. That night, I wrote back to Savannah. Just one line: I don't need to be strong to strike back. I just need to shine enough so they can't manipulate in the dark anymore. I don't know what will happen next, but I do know one thing: I have lifted my head. And this time, I will keep walking without looking back to ask anyone's permission. If you've ever broken down in the middle of the night and no one knew, if you've ever written a letter to yourself just to remind yourself you still matter, you're not alone. Subscribe to Revenge Mark, because sometimes just one word of recognition is enough for someone to rise. I sat at the dining table with Catherine when she said, to see this through, you need to be clear about what you truly want. I had been turning that question over in my mind for days. Do I want them to apologize? Do I want them exposed? Do I want my dignity back? Or do I just want them to no longer have the power to hurt me? After a long silence, I answered, I want closure, but not through screaming or tears. I want them to understand this boundary is permanent. Caleb helped me gather every single piece of evidence: the recording, the text messages, the smear posts, Savannah's account. I saved it all onto a separate hard drive. Piece by piece, layer by layer. It was organized clearly like a legal case file. Not to take it to court, but to show them that I am no longer afraid of whatever they might try to hide. I drafted an email. No long paragraphs, no emotion, just I know everything. And if necessary, I will speak out. I didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, I did something I never thought I would do. I video called Savannah. The call connected after 5 rings. Her face appeared on the screen, tired but smiling. "What are you doing?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "Getting ready for the ending." She nodded. "I'm ready to stand with you." I called Aunt Margaret, met with a few of Mom's old friends, people who had only heard the story from one side. I didn't beg them to take my side. I simply showed them the evidence and let the silence in their eyes speak for itself. Part of me was still afraid Mom would twist this into another family smear campaign like before. Afraid Dad would call, his voice heavy with disapproval like he did back in my freshman year of college, just because I didn't come home for dinner on time. But this time, I knew. My fear was no longer in the driver's seat. Catherine called it soft power. Not loud, not about winning, just so clear that no one could deny it. I put on a white shirt and simple jeans, no makeup, hair tied back neatly. I stood in front of the mirror, looked straight into my own eyes. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "Tomorrow, I will face them, not to reclaim their love, but to lock, with my own hands, the door I once left open for them to walk in and trample on my heart. And once that door is locked, will they still dare to call me by the same old name? Or will they have to learn to see me as an entirely new person?" We agreed to meet at an old cafe near downtown. I arrived first and chose a table by the window, where the light shone directly on my face. I wanted them to see me clearly. No shadows, no hiding. My parents arrived right on time. Mom wore a cream coat, her face carefully made up as if she were heading to a party. Dad wore a dark suit. No smile, just a curt nod. I didn't stand up. No need. I've already ordered. If you want anything else, you can order it yourselves. Mom looked at me, momentarily taken aback. "Madeline, I was hoping we could talk. A little more normally." I tilted my head. What does normally mean? Pretending no one's been hurt, or pretending I'm deaf and mute just to keep your peace? Mom started to reply, but Dad raised a hand to stop her. "We didn't come here to argue. We came because you sent a threatening email." I let out a small laugh. "Call it a threat if you want. But really, it's a warning." I placed a small hard drive on the table. I didn't push it toward them, just left it there. Everything you've ever said, ever done, ever spread behind my back, it's all in here. Mom looked at the hard drive as if it might explode at any second. Dad frowned. "What are you planning to do? Blast it online? Humiliate us? No," I said. "I don't need you humiliated. I just need you to stop." The silence stretched between the three of us. The only sound was the clinking of a spoon in a glass of water at the next table. Mom exhaled, regaining her usual gentle tone. "Madeline, do you realize how badly you're making things look? Everyone's whispering. They think we're the kind of parents who've been cruel to their own child. If you weren't cruel," I cut in, "you wouldn't be afraid of people knowing the truth?" I looked her straight in the eye. No blinking, no looking away. "I don't need an apology anymore, because even if you gave one, I wouldn't believe it. I just need you to understand that my life from this day forward is no longer something you can manipulate." Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Do you realize you're throwing your family away?" I drew a deep breath. I'm not throwing it away. I'm saving myself. Mom's hands began to tremble slightly. I couldn't tell if it was from fear or anger. Sweetheart, if you post those things, people will think you're an ungrateful daughter. I smiled. If I have to choose between being dutiful and being sane, I'll choose sanity. I stood up, leaving the hard drive where it was. I won't post anything, but I won't erase it either. Because if one day you forget where the line is, this will remind you. I turned to leave, didn't look back. But behind me, Mom called out, her voice cold. If you dare walk away from this table without saying one decent word, then don't blame us for exposing everything. I froze, mid-step. They had just threatened to strike back, but this time, where would they aim? 2 days after that meeting, a post appeared on my mother's Facebook account. A video, edited. I'm talking on the phone with Savannah. A line cut out of context if I have to. I'll ruin their reputation. No before. No after. No reason. Just that exact moment. The caption read, "We've endured enough. Being a parent isn't always easy. But when you're threatened by the very person you gave life to," below were hundreds of comments. Some are defending them. Some are calling me a traitor. Some say I should be sued. Caleb was the one who saw it before I did. He called while I was out buying vegetables at the market. You need to see this. I opened my phone, standing in the middle of the crowd, my heart dropping onto the cold tile floor, my vision blurred, not out of surprise, but because I knew they would do this. I just didn't think they'd move this fast. I went home, closed the door, opened my hard drive, opened each file. My hands didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. For the past 3 months, I'd wondered if I released this evidence, would I be any different from them? But now, I knew staying silent wasn't kindness anymore. I sent the unedited video to a few close relatives in the family, along with the full audio recording of my mother talking to someone else about Caleb and teaching the girl a lesson. No caption, just letting them listen. Let them understand for themselves. Then I posted a single photo on my own page. I am on my wedding day, holding Caleb's hand, my eyes looking straight ahead. Below it, the words, "Every story has 2 sides. I don't need anyone to take mine. I only need them to listen long enough to tell the real voice from the noise." Catherine called. "Are you ready for the storm?" I smiled. It's here. But this time, I'm not standing in the rain. That night, messages flooded in. A relative wrote, "Now I understand why she stayed quiet for so long." An old friend sent, "If it were me, I'd have collapsed long ago. I admire you." And then, no more new posts from my mother. Her account vanished the next morning. Silence. No apology. No message. Nothing. But I knew they were watching. Quietly. And I knew that this time, I wasn't backing down. Caleb made tea and brought it out to the balcony. Sat down next to me. "Are you done?" I looked toward the horizon. The clouds were starting to break apart. Almost. There's just one last thing. I still hadn't seen my mother bow her head once. Should I wait for it? Or have I already gone far enough to not need it anymore? A week after I posted the video, everything seemed to quiet down. No new posts from their side, no public apology, no phone calls. Just an emptiness, a silence, thick and heavy. I thought I would feel relieved, and at times, I actually did. One morning, while making coffee in the kitchen, I looked out the window and saw sunlight slipping in through the blinds. My heartbeat was slow and steady. No more sharp pangs. No more flinching every time the notification chime went off. No more feeling like I had to brace myself before unlocking my phone. I started sleeping more deeply, eating with an appetite again. And for the first time since the wedding, I played music while doing the dishes. It was that simple, but I knew that was a victory. But victories also come with losses. I lost an entire branch of my father's side of the family. People who didn't text, didn't check in, didn't defend me. They just walked away. I lost an old friend who messaged, "I don't know who to believe anymore, but the way you handled this feels a bit extreme." I lost a part of myself that once believed family is forever. I don't blame them. I just no longer feel the need to hold on. Savannah and I still call each other every night. She has moved out, rented a small room, and works extra hours at a coffee shop to cover the remaining tuition. She said, "You gave me a reason to choose a different path." I smiled. "And you gave me a reason not to look back." One late afternoon, Catherine hugged me. She didn't say much, just a tight, lingering hug. When she let go, she looked me in the eyes and said, "You've won. But now it's time to breathe. You don't have to keep the armor on anymore." I nodded. For all these months, I had slept in armor, eaten in armor, and even smiled in armor. Now, I just wanted to take it off, for once, to let my skin feel the wind. One evening, Caleb looked at me as I was writing on the balcony. "You've changed," he said. I looked up and asked, "Changed in a good way or an unpredictable way?" He smiled. "Changed in a way where you don't seem to care what people think anymore. Like, you've become yourself again, but stronger." I didn't reply. I just squeezed his hand. Victories don't come with fireworks. There's no cheering crowd, no one shouting. She was right. It's just me, standing in a quiet room, knowing I made it through. And when you survive a battle like this, you no longer need anyone's approval. But I wonder, will this peace be enough for me to finally close it all? I moved into my new place on a Monday morning. I didn't choose the weekend. I didn't call a lot of people to help. It was just me, Caleb, a small moving truck, and a few sealed cardboard boxes. The new house was in the north of Seattle, on the edge of a slope overlooking a pine forest. Small, quiet, no nosy neighbors, no security cameras tracking my every move. Just the kind of silence I had once dreamed of. Not the kind of silence that chills your heart, but the kind where, for the first time in years of noise, you can actually hear yourself. I didn't tell anyone except Savannah and Catherine. No photos posted, no check-ins, no new beginning status updates. I didn't need anyone to congratulate me. I only needed to know that I was moving forward on legs that no longer trembled. Every morning, I brewed tea, opened the window, and watched the sunlight spill through the leaves. Sometimes, I sat and wrote for hours in an old leather notebook Caleb had given me from our first wedding. Not to retell the past, but to record everything. I was relearning like a child learning to name her feelings for the first time. One afternoon, Savannah and I sat by the lake, eating waffles and drinking cold coffee. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. I still think, one day, they'll apologize. I nodded. I used to think that too. And now I looked at the still lake. The surface didn't ripple, but I knew, beneath it, the current was still quietly moving. Now I don't need it anymore. Because forgiveness isn't about waiting for an apology. It's about moving forward without chaining yourself to it anymore. I kept the old hard drive locked away in a drawer, not to threaten anyone, but to remind myself I survived. I got back up. I kept my humanity intact through all the times I wanted to turn to stone. Once, Caleb asked me, "Do you think you'll ever be the same as before?" I shook my head. No, I don't want to be the same. I want to become the version of myself I used to fear the most. A woman who doesn't need anyone's permission to be at peace. I started teaching a part-time writing class at the small local community center. There were 12 students. The oldest was 72, the youngest 19. On the first day, I asked them, "Have you ever been cut off when you were saying something important?" Everyone nodded, and I said, "Then this will be the place where no one interrupts you." We didn't write about victories. We wrote about loss, about closed doors, and about the things we never dared to say, and one by one, they began to reclaim the voices that had once been buried deep under deliberate silence. I don't know what lies ahead for me. I'm not sure if there will come a day when my mother calls again or sends a long overdue letter. But I know this. If that day ever comes, I will no longer be the daughter standing frozen in a crowded dining room, waiting for someone to defend me. I am myself, completely. Without needing to prove it, if you've ever been called too sensitive, too unpredictable, or not obedient enough, if you've ever loved until you were drained, only to be met with denial, I see you, I understand, and I believe you can stand up, even if no one reaches out a hand to pull you up. Leave a comment if this story speaks to you. Share it if you know someone slowly withering away in silence, and subscribe to Revenge Mark, because those once thought to be weak, we will be the ones who tell the strongest stories.